This chicken pot pie is rich, creamy, and packed with flavor. And the best part is everything comes together in one pan. This is part of my recipe series where I share a new simple dish every single week. With a flaky golden crust and a rich homemade filling, this is comfort food at its best. The first thing we need to do is prep our ingredients. I'll start by dicing the onion and getting everything ready to go. Next, we'll dice the celery. I like everything to be about a medium dice, not too big and not too small. We're starting with what's called a Mirepoix. It's a classic combination of onion, carrot, and celery that builds a lot of flavor. One small tip I learned a long time ago working in kitchens is that it's usually easier to work with products that are about half the length of your knife. That's why you'll see me cut the celery into smaller sections before dicing it. I'll do the same thing with the carrots. It just gives you better control and helps keep your cuts more consistent. While I am trying to keep my cuts fairly consistent, I'm more concerned with yield. I want to use as much of the vegetable as possible. In restaurants, they'll often square everything off so every piece is perfectly uniform, but that also creates extra trim that has to be used somewhere else. So instead, I just focus on keeping the cuts roughly consistent while still using the whole carrot. We'll finish cutting the carrots, then get our cast iron pan heating up. I love using cast iron because it heats evenly and retains heat really well. It does take longer to heat up though, so give the pan time before adding the oil. You can hear the vegetables sizzling as soon as they hit the pan. That's how you know the pan is properly heated. We're just going to cook the vegetables until they start turning translucent. We don't really want color here. We're just trying to soften them up so they lose that raw texture. While the vegetables cook, I'll mince up a whole bulb of garlic. We add the garlic later because it cooks much faster than the onions, carrots, and celery. And if it cooks too long, it can burn and become bitter. We'll add the garlic to the pan and cook it for another couple of minutes. Again, we're not trying to add color here. We just want to cook the rawness out of the garlic and soften it slightly. We'll go ahead and season everything with a little salt and pepper, and then I'll push the vegetables to the sides of the pan so we can make our roux. A roux is just equal parts fat and flour. I'm using all-purpose flour and Kerrygold salted butter here. We'll melt the butter, add the flour, and then stir everything together. This only needs to cook for a minute or two. We're just trying to cook the raw flour flavor out. We don't really want to brown it. Make sure you stir constantly so nothing burns. Once the roux is ready, we'll deglaze the pan with a little white wine. Then reduce that down by about 75%. After that, we'll slowly add the milk and chicken base. It'll look very thick at first, but it loosens up as the milk goes in. I like to add the milk a little at a time and let it thicken as I go. This usually takes me 3 or 4 times of adding milk and stirring until it gets thick again. If you've ever made gravy before, this is basically the same technique. It's actually very simple once you understand how it works. This is a very classic way of making a thickened sauce. In this case, we're using it for our pot pie filling. Another option would be using a cornstarch slurry, but we'll talk about that in a different video. By the time all the liquid's added, the pan will be almost completely full, but we still want to leave a little room because we have a few more things to add to this as well. One of the great things about pot pie is you can add almost anything you want to it. I'm going to slice up some mushrooms and add those in as well. I'm adding them raw because they'll cook perfectly in the sauce. Mushrooms absorb a lot of flavor almost like a sponge, so as they cook, they'll soak up all that rich pot pie filling. Now we're going to cut up some potatoes. I'm going to boil these separately until they're fully cooked. Then we'll drain them and add them straight into the pot pie filling. The next thing we'll work on is chopping the herbs. I grabbed a few fresh herbs from the garden along with some parsley. I'm chopping them fairly fine because I don't want large pieces of herbs throughout the pot pie. We'll go ahead and add the fresh herbs to the filling. And now we'll cut up the chicken. The chicken I'm using here is actually some roasted chicken thighs I made earlier. I just wanted to use the leftovers for something else, and they work perfectly in this pot pie. Now we'll add the cooked potatoes and chicken to the filling. Then just stir everything together until it's fully combined. At this point, the filling is really starting to come together. Since this is a one-pan dish, I'm just going to lay the pie dough directly over the top and bake it off. You can use store-bought dough or make your own. I'll link my homemade pie dough recipe here, and again at the end of the video. We'll just roll the dough out until it's large enough to cover the pan. I'm actually in the middle of moving right now, and one of the things I accidentally packed was my rolling pin. So today I'm using a bottle of wine instead. It's definitely not the first time I've used a wine bottle as a rolling pin. You could also use a bottle of olive oil or really anything similar you have around. Sometimes you just have to improvise and work with what you got. I'll roll the dough around the wine bottle and transfer it right over to the pan. If your dough isn't quite large enough to cover everything perfectly, you can always patch it with a little extra dough from the sides. You can also gently stretch the dough a little more so it fully covers the pan. I like to leave about a ½ inch hanging over the edge just in case the dough shrinks while it bakes. And honestly, I like a little extra crust on the dish like this anyway. Once the dough is laid all the way around the pan, I'll just trim off any excess with a knife. Before this goes into the oven, we'll cut a few slits in the top so the steam can escape while it bakes. We'll brush the top with a little egg wash as well. And unfortunately, another thing I packed a little too early was my pastry brush, so today I'm using a spoon instead. And since this pan is filled almost all the way to the top, make sure you place a sheet tray or some foil underneath it in the oven. That way if anything bubbles over, it won't drip onto the bottom of the oven and burn. Since the filling is already cooked and still warm, we're really just baking the crust at this point. It shouldn't take too long, but just keep an eye on it and rotate the pan if needed so it browns evenly. And this right here is exactly what you want. Golden brown on top and steaming hot underneath. This is the perfect cold weather comfort food. The crust is flaky, the filling is rich, and the whole thing just feels comforting. If you enjoy videos like this, I share 2 new recipes every single week, and we'd love to have you subscribe and gather at our table. We'll see you on the next one.